Hey folks, Quilly18 here, and welcome to another Unity 3D multiplayer FPS tutorial. And today we're gonna set up the basic skeleton for our networking. Mostly we're gonna get rid of this incredibly annoying little pop-up here, finally. And maybe I should have done this earlier just to get it out of the way. So again, I am using a plugin called Photon Unity Networking, which basically just adds more stuff to Unity itself. It also is tied into a Photon cloud service, which if you're developing this game, so the plugin itself is free. The Photon Cloud is a server service that makes it just way easier for you people to sort of do the lobby matchmaking kind of nonsense. You don't have to use them even if you're using the Photon Unity network. You can. They also have their own server software. They have a free Photon Cloud setup that you can have, I think, 20 concurrent users on, and also you can download the server for free and have up to 100 users on. And then if you want a license for more stuff, either as an actual server that you run or through the cloud, then there's a fee, but it's not very much. These guys don't pay me or anything. I just think they're awesome, and they certainly make developing this pretty easy. So if you've never used them before, what you want to do is you want to put in your email address here, and what they're going to do is automatically set up an account for you if you hit send. For me, it's going to tell me email already registered, but what will happen if you haven't done it before, you do this, they'll send you an email with your account information, but you don't even have to look at it because it's automatically going to create an app ID and automatically fill it out here for you. For me, what I have to do is actually swing over to just my other window and grab my app ID. Now, normally, whoops, did I not copy and paste properly? One sec. Copy. There we go. Normally, you don't want anyone else to know what this app ID is. This is just one of the free accounts with 20 concurrent users. There's no reason for anyone in the universe to ever copy this, so there it is. And we do a save at this point. Good. So, what that wizard does is it just makes our life ever so slightly easier. You don't have to use the wizard to set up most things. You don't have to use the cloud network. What the wizard does is in our Photon Unity networking folder, under resources, it creates a little text file here, this Photon server settings, that has the cloud server address, the port, the app ID, and gets those settings in place. Now, it turns out there's something that I did last time that is going to cause our program to not compile properly. I'm just putting a warning out there. We're going to experience that in just a moment. This is actually the second time recording this because the first time I hit this problem, I'm like, what the hell's going on? So we're going to hit that. We're going to learn together. So I've got my scene going on here, and what I want to do is now that I've got my networking set up, I want to get it so that it technically connects to the server. There's not going to be a whole lot of networky kind of things going on, but there's, we want to get the basic skeleton down and out of the way. So let's do that. What I'm going to do is I'm going to create an empty object here. Boom, like that. I am recording and everything is fine. Everything is groovy. Okay. I'm going to create this empty game object, and I'm going to, just for the kicks, I'm going to put it in the 0 position because I like to do that. It just makes me feel good. This object really doesn't matter where it is. You could have it 10,000 miles off to the left of the screen, and that would be okay too. But this is going to be an object I'm going to call scripts. And I'm going to use this as a repository of all my sort of global scripts that just should exist in the level, generally speaking, are going to live on this object. The reason I'm putting an underscore here and also in the static object group is because that keeps them alphabetically at the top of the list in the hierarchy, which just makes them easier to find and keeps everything neat and clean and handy. The other thing we're going to do is we're going to get rid of this built-in first-person object. We don't want the first-person object to exist at the start of the game. We want to spawn this object once we've connected to the server. So in my assets folder, I'm going to create, a subfolder for prefabs like that. And I'm going to take it. This is already a prefab, right? If I click select, it's already a prefab, but it's part of the Unity standard assets character controllers. And, I'm going to be making some changes to this prefab, and I'd rather not overwrite the original one. I want to have one that feels like it's actually kind of mine. So I'm going to drag this into the prefabs folder here. It's going to create a new one. And I can even rename this to something like player controller or something, which will rename it there. And I'm actually going to get rid of it from the world as well, just so that way we're starting off with this blank area. And keep in mind, we actually don't even have a camera at this point, which might be a little weird. What happens if you have no camera at all, actually? Just a blank screen. Interesting. I don't think I've ever run a scene without any camera whatsoever. Let's, for the heck of it, just for the heck of it, to keep things interesting, I'm going to throw a camera. This has no actual gameplay value, but it's, it's the nice extra little polish here. I'm going to grab this camera like this, and I'm going to, where's the There we go, the red rotate. We're going to do that. Go back into top view, and I'm just going to set the X to 0, nicely centered. There we are. So now when we start the game, we're going to get a nice view of the level. God, it is so sexy and early 90s. And so this is going to be the just the main menu camera, and what we'll probably want to do is disable it later on when we actually spawn our character. But now we get a nice little view of the world while we wait for the server to connect up. Okay. So under scripts, we're going to create a new script for my first attempt called Network Manager. And this is going to be responsible simply for connecting us to the server the first time around. The functionality of this is going to be very bare bones, very simple for our demo at this point, and we'll come back and add more and more things to it later on. I'm going to use C# because I like C#, and then we're going to pop this open. Now, I have not done anything to this script at all whatsoever. It's a blank script. Obviously, everything should be fine, but now all of a sudden, I'm getting a weird, bizarre error in my console log. What is this? Internal compiler error? Okay, well this one here actually is whining that the using camera.main camera is obsolete. And finally it's obsolete because there used to be a camera.main and a camera.main camera, and they were the same. Unity's finally said, you know what, we're getting rid of one. It's stupid. And the reason is this exists in one of the demos that came with the Photon Unity networking asset that we got from the store. Clearly the demos haven't been updated for Unity 4.3 yet at the time that I'm doing this. You know what? We don't need the demos, so I'm actually just going to get rid of them completely. Probably. I mean, frankly, there might be some little ideas we want to steal here. No, I'm going to get rid of the demos. We're going to keep it nice and clean. I'm just going to get rid of that entire folder. So now we're no longer get the error about there's a camera obsolete. But we've got this thing. What? System.typeLoadException could not load type system.func1 for assembly MS core. What on earth does this mean? You know what? Googling for it is not even very helpful, which is unfortunate. The thing is, one of the things we pulled in for the Photon Unity networking, there's a plugin folder. So there's like actual Photon Unity networking stuff here with a bunch of scripts and things and stuff. But there's a plugins folder here that's got a few things for us. This plugins folder has to be in our root. I think it only has to be in our root if you use JavaScript. I think if there's any JavaScript anywhere in your app, it has to be in your root. But some of the stuff that we got with the Photon Unity network and some of the character controllers is JavaScripty stuff, and I think that's what the problem is. And it has to do with the order of compilation or other such nonsense or whatever. Listen, the magic happens. The plugin folder has to be in your base asset folder, like this. And now all of a sudden, the error is gone. If I hit play, well, I mean, nothing is happening anymore, but it's running without error. Okay, we're back to sanity. Thank God. You have no idea how crazy that drove me. All right, popping back over here, let's make our font bigger so you guys can actually see what's going on. Our network manager, I don't think we're going to need an update here. So what are we going to do? First, what's going to happen as soon as the game starts, I don't need to present a fancy GUI to give people any options or anything like that. Let's connect right away. And I'm going to, rather than putting the code in start, I'm going to create a function here called connect. And then in start, we're just going to call connect. But later on, we're probably going to want some sort of GUI button to launch this. In fact, we might not even want this object to be part of this scene exactly. We might want to do it in a main menu and different things. But we're going to keep our life very simple at this point. So how do we actually connect to things? So we're going to look at our first Photon code. So there's a new class called Photon Network, and it's mostly a static class. You don't have to instantiate or anything. You just run stuff from there. So if I go dot and then connect, there's this connect function. Now, if I use this function, it's going to ask me for a server address, a port, an app ID, and then a game version string, which we're going to talk about in a second. This is if you want to manually connect to a server, probably one that you're running yourself. You're going to want to put in the address. Now, you probably don't want to put an IP address. I mean, right now, if you're deciding to run a server on your computer, then you're just going to want to do, 127.0.0.1, which is always yourself, or actually you could put in localhost. That works fine too. But in practice, you're going to want to do something like, mygameserver.mygamecompany.com, and port. Obviously, you're going to have the port leet. Very important. I guess it's a number, not a string, and so on. We're not using that. The reason we're not using that is because we use the Photon Unity network to create this nice little server setting thing, which has got all of our info. And we can put in our own info. Like, it's got the cloud in there, but I can say self-hosted and just put in all my IP address information in there. But so that's great. So what we're going to do is we're going to say, listen, we've got this file, use connect using settings. It's going to use our settings file. It still needs something. It needs something called a game version string. And all that does is if you have multiple clients, like if you have, your patch 1.0 and then you come out with a patch 1.1 and you have some people running the old version, some running the new version, you don't want them to both go in the same game. So this string is just going to be your, version 1.0.0 type of string. And this is fine. You can also call this the super fantastic version A314 version. And that's fine. It doesn't actually care what you put in here. It just requires uniqueness. It'll only match you with people that have exactly the same string. So, you can, for the second version, you can call it even more fantastic version A314. But I'm going to keep it boring and call it multi-FPS 001. There. So now I've got that in there. So what we're going to do is connect to the server. The other thing I'm going to do, just to get a little bit of feedback, is I'm going to create an on GUI here. And what I'm going to do is do a GUI layout dot label, just a piece of string. And because I'm not using any sort of boxy kind of stuff, by default, it should just show up in the top left corner of the screen. I'm going to use the label, and Photon Network has something called connection state detailed. And this is just you can convert it to a string. I think it would auto convert it to a string there. And this is just going to tell me what the current connection status is. And we can start with just this. So we've got our scripts object. It's got our network manager. So if I hit play, I'm going to switch over to the game thing right away. I'll hide the stats. In the top left corner, we should get some text. There you go. It goes very fast. It goes connecting, connected, joined lobby. So it's actually working. It is trying to connect to the server, then it successfully connects to the server, and then it joins the server lobby. The server lobby is where you can get your list of all the games on the server. You could create a game. You can do all those sorts of things, and usually create your GUI to do that sort of thing. Again, we're going to take the simple sort of route. So there are functions that get called when these various events fire. So there are functions. So it goes connecting, connected, joined lobby. There's actually a function, a callback here called on joined lobby. You can find all this stuff in the Photon Unity networking documentation, but the process is going to be pretty samey. So at this point, we know we've connected to the server, which is great. What do we want to do? Well, again, we could, ask for a list of rooms. I think we can do something like Photon network room, join room, get room list, right? You can do that, for example, create room, all kinds of things. Well, we want to join a room. And actually, because we aren't going to be building an interface right here to create rooms, it's any sort of GUI stuff. You create a GUI with some text fields. Maybe we'll do an example for it at some point. And then what you would do is you can call create room, and you can call the room stuff. So whatever the player put in, players, room, name, whatever the player entered in your GUI, that's what you would call the room here. But we don't care about that. We're just going to say, join. We just want to join a random room, because you can join a room by name as well. But we just want to join just some random room on the server. We don't care which one it is. So we're going to do that, and let's see what happens. Let's run this step. We're going to open the console, because we should get some messages in here. Joined lobby, and then what? On join lobby. Did I spell this wrong? This should be firing. Debug.log. Let's find out. Because it should be firing and then giving us an error. Okay, we're definitely running on joined lobby. That's very weird, because this should definitely then fail. And I thought it would give us an error in the log. It used to. Because it's definitely failing to join a random room. And the reason is there is no room. there's no room that currently exists on the server. I'm just confused as to why we're not getting an actual error here. Because what this is going to do, there's two functions. There's void on Photon join failed. This gets called if you fail to join a room. Now, in this case, this won't actually work for us because this only responds if join room fails. We're not using join room, we're just using join random room. So, join random. No, sorry, that's wrong. It's on Photon random join failed. So we're going to put in a little call for that too, but something is being weird. Something is being very weird. Yeah! Why am I not getting errors? The hell is this? Why am I not getting, I suspect that this is something that is some weird interaction between Photon and Unity 4.3. Because normally you get nice big error messages that say, "Oh my God, we completely failed to join a room. Freak out, freak out." And I apologize for this sort of like fiddling around here because I like to the way I like to show how to figure out things is to show, oh, there's an error. How do we deal with the error? And I don't like this sort of thing where like I magically know that this is what's going on, therefore I'm telling you this is what you should do, because that's not how I like to teach people. I want to teach people how to think, not, you know, how to parrot something. But I guess you're just gonna have to take my word for it here, and if I can figure out why we're not getting error messages, I will let you know. Alright, moving on. So, we try to join a random room, but it fails. The reason is there's not a room that exists. There's simply no room whatsoever on the server. And that's okay, so we can deal with that. Photon network dot. Now we can create a room. Now it does need a name, but here again, we're not creating named rooms. We don't care about that in this particular demo, so we can actually pass a null right here, and that's totally fine. So now we're gonna create a room, and then it actually is going to eventually automatically create, it's going to join us. It's going to create the room and then join the room. So on, hold on, is it on Photon or on join? So just on joined room. And again, you know what we're going to do? We're going to copy our little debug statement and put it in there. So we're going to create a room and then it should instantly join that room as well. So let's go over here. Watch the debug play out. There it is, on joined room. Now, if we were, at this point, we could absolutely, yeah, what the hell, let's do it. Let's go in build settings. Windows is fine. Go away. Yeah, I guess when I imported this project with all the demos, it populated a lot of like weirdness in here. And that might be it. Maybe I imported too much things and it sort of changed things. Anyway, so I'm going to build a standalone version of Windows here. I'm going to create a folder called builds, and we're going to call it multi-FPS, and just compile this. It should go really quickly. I don't think it needs to regenerate the light maps. Good stuff. And run this in windowed mode. So we're going to play this one. So this one will do the same thing. It will connect to the server, join the lobby, fail to join a random room, and then it will create a room, which is in the join status. Now, over here in actual Unity, if I clear this and I hit play, this client should actually, it won't fail to join a random room. You see that? We did not get the on Photon random join failed because it tried to join a random room and one existed. So it just joined that one here. Obviously, there's nothing going on the screen, so there's a little bit of, you got to take my word for it, but it's happening. So I can close that, and we are still connected over here, and now we can close this, and that's fine. And that's one of the advantages, using the cloud and using different kinds of things. We don't have to worry about IP addresses, firewalls, any of that nonsense. It's all handled through the cloud. The first person who creates the room is the master of that room, but if that person leaves, then the next person, you know, who had joined that room. So if one person creates a room, that person is the master, then 10 people join the room after that. We've got 11 people in there. But then the master leaves, well, the second person probably may not be that person, but some other person in that room becomes the new master, and everything just keeps working, and it's beautiful. It's a wonderful thing. All right, good. So we are at the point where we're joining the server, which is great, but you know what? We're in testing mode. We don't actually want to use the internet. I mean, God, that sounds like a little bit of extra, lag to figure things out during our testing phase. So what we can do is there's an offline mode in here, which we can set to true. So if we do this, instead of connecting, well, you know what? Let me come back to that. We're gonna come back to offline mode. But I used this in one of my other games before, where from the main menu I created a GUI and there was a single player button and a multiplayer button. And what you don't want to have to code a bunch of stuff in your game that says, am I connected, am I not connected, and do different behaviors. Photon Network has this offline mode that you can turn on, and everything will keep working exactly the same. All your networked calls will still work, they just won't go out to the internet. The only weirdness is if you go into offline mode, then I'll have to double check, but I think it'll whine about doing the connect and maybe one of the other room commands. It's kind of bizarre. You want to just skip one of these sort of creation calls, and that's it. Everything else in your system will work perfectly fine. RPCs and network views and yada yada yada, which you guys don't even know what that is yet. All right, so we're now connecting, which is great. But obviously we don't have a player yet, right? After we connect, the game should spawn us a player. So let's do that. So on joined room, this is where we want to do. Let's make a new function called spawn player. Spawn my player. There, I like that. Makes it more explicit. Okay. So we're going to do that. We're going to call that. All right, so what do we have to do to spawn a player? Now, normally, if you want to create something, you're just going to want to use Instantiate. And that'll create a new object. And Instantiate still works here, and you could do this. You can instantiate, your player prefab, right? If we create a variable to hold on to this, we could instantiate the prefab. The problem is Instantiate will only create this object on my current computer. If I'm connected to a server, this will not create anything on anyone else's computer. This is not what we want to use. Instead, what we want to use is Photon Network.instantiate, right? Subtly different, but what this does is this will instantiate something on everyone's computer at the same time, which is really, really good. The big difference between the regular instantiate and the Photon Network instantiate is, one, first of all, you have to put in a position rotation. That is not optional, whereas normally it is optional, and I think it just spawns it at the 0, 0, 0 point. You have to specify it, and that's okay. You know what? You end up specifying it most of the time. You'll also notice the very first thing in here is a string. It doesn't accept a game object or a transform like an actual link to a prefab. It wants a string that represents the name of the prefab. And that's very important. So the reason it's like that is because what it tells all the other clients that are connected to the server is it just tells the name, create an object called player controller, and then it goes and finds the player controller and creates that, which actually means we can't have the player controller in a prefabs folder because it needs to be a resource. To instantiate something by name like this, so player controller, and you'll see if we try this, okay, we're going to do that. We're going to try to spawn the player at the 0 point with quaternion.identity. It also needs a group ID, which we're going to set to 0 at this point. The group ID, if you're using the cloud server, does nothing. But what it allows you to do is send updates of an object only to people in a certain group. And it lets you, if you're doing something like an MMO and you want to divide up the world so that not everyone's getting every single update, or you want a team-based chat that is private, so you can have a team 1, a team 0, and then you're just sending the updates to the correct team. For our purposes, we're just going to set it to 0 because the Photon Cloud doesn't really use that optimization anyway. Okay, so if I do this, let's see what happens if I hit run. We're going to get an error. God damn, we better get an actual error this time, or I'm going to be very fussy. There we go. All right. Photon Network error could not instantiate the prefab player controller. Please verify you have this object in a resources folder and not in a subfolder. So what does that mean? It simply means, well, we need a resources folder, and we just stick our player controller in that. And you're going to say, well, it says not a subfolder. You've got your resources in a subfolder of prefab. Well, that's okay. your actual object has to be directly in resources. I can't have, a folder in here called player stuff and then put things in there. That won't work. And you can have more than one resources folder. In fact, we do, because the Photon Unity Networking has a resources folder here, for example. And what this does, this is a Unity built-in thing. This is not a Photon thing. Anything in a resources folder can be loaded by a string at runtime. And so it usually comes up if you want to load things. You don't want to preload everything and various other optimizations. And I'm getting off the beaten track here. But all you need to know is this is the way we need to have it working for Photon. Anything you want to be able to instantiate over the network has to be in a resources folder. So in fact, instead of calling this prefabs, I could actually call this player stuff. I keep all my player stuff inside this, and then specifically resources that I'm going to spawn over the network can be there. And only the prefab itself has to be in a resources folder. If I had any scripts related to the player, I could have the scripts here, 3D models, all that information to be sitting in here. It's only the final prefab that's got to be right in this folder here. So now if I hit run and check the console log, it should work. No, we get another error. Could not instantiate the prefab player controller as it has no Photon view attached to the root. What is this saying? All right, it's saying exactly what it wants you to do, but it might be a little weird the first time. Our object here needs another component. It's got some components, right? It's got a transform, it's got a character controller, it's got some scripts attached to it. Well, it needs another script attached to it called Photon view. Photon view. So this is the script that you put on an object that allows the object to be synchronized over the network, right? Just having it in the resource folder technically would be enough to maybe allow you to spawn the object. But if you want the object to stay in sync across every client, you need a Photon view. Everything that gets updated over the network needs a Photon view. So our map never changes, so it doesn't need a Photon view, and it's in the scene right from the beginning. So it's fine, it doesn't need anything like that. But this does. Other things that may not need a Photon view could include things like explosion effects. You can have when a bullet explodes. So the bullets will need a Photon view because they need to be synchronized across the network. But when they explode and create an explosion effect that maybe shoots out debris all over, the debris itself doesn't have to be synchronized because it's not sort of important for gameplay. You will have something called an RPC function that will say, make an explosion here. And then each client will just go into its prefab folder, not a resources folder, but just a regular prefab folder, just spawn an explosion that's got a bunch of debris bits, and each, the explosion might look slightly different on everyone's computer if you've got any kind of like randomness to the debris, and that's okay, who cares, right? As long as everyone sees an explosion in the same place, that's all that matters. But our player, obviously, players need to be synchronized across everyone, so it needs a Photon view. And I'm just going to leave it blank for now, but we're going to have to do some things here. We're going to see what happens if we hit play. Do we get to the point where we get no errors? We do, in fact, get no errors. We do, in fact, spawn a player, which then immediately begins to fall. And why is that? Well, it spawns, if I split the view, and then from the game view, I bring up here, we're spawning our player at the 0, 0, 0 point, which happens to be this gap. Let's hit play and see what happens. We're going to connect, it spawns the player, and there's the player right there, which is now falling through the world. And that's okay. It means everything is working exactly the way that it should. Maybe not the way you want, but it's the way it should given everything that's going on. Also, you'll notice that the game view switches from this view to the other camera once the player comes in. But both cameras are technically still here, and they're both technically still rendering, right? There's still that other camera in the view. It just so happens that one is being rendered on top of the other, the player camera. So it renders this whole shot first, and then it renders the player view on top of that, which is kind of wasteful. So really what we want to do is we want to disable this main menu camera when the player spawns, or something like that. I suppose I won't stress about it at this point. But what would be really cool is disable this camera when the player spawns, but then if the player dies, delete the player and his camera, and then re-enable this camera here so that while you're waiting to respawn, you can still be watching the combat go back and forth, which is very cool, right? So I'm just going to leave it on for now, but keep in mind that this is a little bit silly. What we're going to probably want to do in our network manager script, we probably want to create a public, well, let's just do it. Public camera, we're going to do, what do we call it? Standby camera. Camera like that. And so now there's going to be a field for that. And I'm going to call this the standby camera. Actually, it's a great name. The names don't have to match, but it's a good idea. We're going to put that in there. Good. And then what we're going to do is after we spawn the player, we are going to say standby camera. We're going to set. Oh, right, because we got the camera object, not the game object. So we can say enabled equals false. There we go. And that camera will turn itself off and not render anything. It'll technically save us a little bit of processing. But we're not done sort of dealing with all the errors that could possibly happen. If I let this play and then I take the player and delete it, now we're going to get a blank screen because we don't have that other camera, but that's okay. All right, so good. We have a player that shows up. Doesn't show up in a good spot yet. You know what? God, we have so many little things to do. I'm just trying to figure out what order to do them in. I'm going to put a cut in this video, and when we come back, we'll try to make the player spawn in a sane location, and then we're going to examine other things that are currently broken with the way that our player spawns. See you next time, folks. Bye-bye.